Welcome, everyone. My name is David Weinstein, Director of the Center on Japanese Economy and Business, which we call CJEB, at Columbia Business School, and Carl Schaut Professor of the Japanese Economy at Columbia University. I'm joining you from London, which you can see behind me, where I've been on sabbatical leave as a visiting professor at the London School of Economics, and I'll be returning to Columbia at the end of this month. On behalf of CJEB, I want to welcome you to our webinar, Economic Recovery from the Pandemic and Transformation Toward a Better New Normal in Japan and the United States. Unfortunately, our chairman, Professor Hugh Patrick, will not be able to join us today, but he is proud to have been involved in supporting the creation of these webinars and shares our happiness with their success. All of us at CJEB are truly grateful to all of you for joining us today, despite the adversity we have all been facing as a result of the pandemic. I also want to express our gratitude to CJEB's sponsors for the generous donations and continued support, now more than ever, as we navigate the current crisis. Despite the funding challenges, we have taken advantage of new technologies to launch a series of webinars that are now reaching approximately 1,000 people per event, giving us greater reach than we have ever had before. Let me also take this opportunity to give a brief introduction of CJEB. The center was established in 1986 by Professor Hugh Patrick, and he led the center until July of last year, when he moved to a new position as chairman and I took over as director. CJEB's mission has always been to promote knowledge and understanding of Japan's economy and its business systems in a global context. We continue to do so with evolving methods in the world's new normal, which we are exploring in these webinars. We are a widely recognized research organization, but in addition to research, we also provide events involving leading experts from public and private sectors with opportunities to share knowledge, collaborate, and reflect on Japan, the United States, and the global economy. These events traditionally were through international conferences and lectures, but now we've moved to a very successful online format. In North America, we remain unique as the only research center in an academic setting that specializes on the Japanese economy and business systems. Today's webinar, which is part of the Japan's Economy in the COVID-19 Era series, is a remarkable event about how we are going to navigate towards a future in which we have to deal with this terrible health crisis. The first two events were conducted in Japanese and generated a great deal of interest and discussion. Our last webinar was especially noteworthy as the speakers joined from 4 major cities: Tokyo, New York, Washington, D.C., and Manila, which would only have been possible in a web-based events. We're now in a 3-part English portion of the series. Today's webinar is the second of the 3 to be conducted in English, and we'll go into more detail about our next webinar at the end of this session. As you can see, I'm talking to you from London, which was particularly hard hit in the early months of the pandemic and had one of the highest death tolls, per capita death tolls of any major country at the outset. Despite stumbling badly at the beginning, the UK seems to have enacted a very effective lockdown and ramping up of testing, which has resulted in a dramatic decline in the number of COVID cases despite the fact that a few weeks ago, the United Kingdom has reopened. To give you some sense about the relative success of the UK policy, currently every day in the UK, about 600 people or so are infected with or identified as having COVID symptoms. That's roughly equal to the number of people who are counted as being infected in the United States every 15 minutes. So it's been a remarkable adjustment to a new normal. Now on to today's topic, economic recovery from the pandemic and a transformation to a better new normal. My role is to introduce Professor Takatoshi Ito, who will then introduce our distinguished panelists. Taka is director of the Program on Public Pension and Sovereign Funds at CJEB and a professor at the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University. Before I turn the podium over to Taka, I want to first take advantage of this technology to do a quick poll of the audience to get a sense about what people are thinking the future is going to look like. So what I'd like you to look at is this slide that we've just put up and answer the following question. What do you think the shape of the economic recovery is going to look like in Japan? So is it going to be V-shaped, in which you have a sharp downturn and a sharp rebound, U-shaped, a more a period of lower GDP followed by a rapid rise, W-shaped, L-shaped if you think it's going to go down and it's going to be a long time before it comes up, or shaped more like a Nike swoosh. So we're now going to post for about 15 seconds the poll, and so please tick one box based on that. Okay, and let's see what the results are. So it looks like most people think that the recovery is going to occur via a relatively slow process. A Nike swoosh seems to be the most popular response. And some significant minority thinks that there may be multiple ups and downs as Japan moves towards recovery. Only about 10% of people think that it's going to be a long and sustained downturn or an L-shaped recovery. Okay, now what I want to do is ask exactly the same question, but about the United States, not about Japan. So if you could, just please answer the questions and see what you think the US is going to look like. Okay, so let's take a look at the results for the US. Interesting. So our audience seems to think that there's a much higher probability that we're going to see multiple ups and downs for the United States relative to Japan, and a fairly roughly equal number of people think that there'll be some combination of either a U shape or a swoosh shape, which may be kind of similar kinds of results. But what's really interesting, at least among our audience, is that it seems that people are believing that there's going to be a lot more volatility in the US economy in the upcoming months. Well, With that as a background, I now want to turn the event over to our speakers, and we'll see whether they agree with the audience or have different opinions from what people are suggesting. So Taka, thank you very much for being here today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, David. Hello, everyone. I'm Takatoshi, Director of the Program of Public Pension and Sovereign Funds at the CJEB and Professor at the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University. As David explained, today's topic is economic recovery from the pandemic and transformation toward a better new normal in Japan and the United States. This is a very timely topic, obviously, as the balance between preventing COVID-19 to spread in the society and helping the economy to reopen is an immediate policy question in both the United States and Japan. Today, we are honored to be joined by two world-renowned individuals. Our first speaker will be Minister Yasutoshi Nishimura, who has many hats actually, and 5 concurrent ministerial positions. As Minister for Novel Coronavirus Disease Control, he is in charge of managing the COVID-19 problem. As Minister for Economic and Fiscal Policy, CEFP, he is in charge of deciding the basic economic policy package, the so-called Honebuto no Hoshin. In addition, Mr. Nishimura is also Minister in charge of economic revitalization, that is structural reforms and growth policies, Minister in charge of Social Security reform, and Minister for Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP. So he is really a key person in Japan, deciding literally day by day the relative weights between saving lives and saving livelihoods. He also prepares the economy for the new normal in the post-COVID world. After Minister Nishimura speaks, we will hear from Professor Glenn Hubbard, who is Dean Emeritus and Russell L. Carson Professor of Finance and Economics at Columbia Business School. Last year, he relinquished the position of Dean of Business School after 15 successful years. Before the deanship, he was chair of Council of Economic Advisors, CEA, which is a ministerial position under President George W. Bush. Minister of CEFP, which Mr. Nishimura now occupies, is a counterpart of chair of CEA. After we hear from Minister Nishimura and Professor Hubbard, we will have Q&A sessions to address questions from the audience. But before turning to Minister Nishimura, I'd like to show a table and the figures to compare the New York and Tokyo, some statistics. So, this is the table. So I'm comparing Tokyo metropolitan area and New York State. Then per 100,000 people, we had cumulatively had 66 people infected in Tokyo compared to 2,082. So this is like 30 times, or Tokyo is 1/30 of New York. More striking difference is the number of deaths per 100,000 people, and that's 2 in Tokyo against 128 in New York. So this is like 55 times. So looking at this numbers, you can say that Tokyo has fared relatively well compared to New York. But this is New York daily infected numbers. And we had a very sharp increase in March and April. So Governor Cuomo likes to say that we had 42 days of increase climbing up the mountain, and then gradual decrease. And now we have around 500, 600 people per day to be found positive in PCR testing. This is Tokyo. So this is a strange shape that we had, similar to New York, increase in March and April, and gradual decline until the late May, when the emergency declaration was lifted, and then we have found an increase again and surpassed the peak of previous mountain. So we are climbing again the second wave or second peak, and this is a bit worrisome. So cumulatively, the number is looks great in Tokyo compared to New York, but this recent surge in the number of the infected positive case is a bit worrisome. Okay, so with that introduction, I'd like to turn to Minister Nishimura, and we will hear from him on the state of those COVID-19 and also reopening the economy. So floor is yours, Minister Nishimura, and please make your presentation. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Professor Ito. It's my great pleasure and honor to participate in this webinar. As introduced, I am in charge of both economic and fiscal policy, as well as novel coronavirus disease control in Japan. I believe there are not many ministers taking on these two roles at the same time in the world. We are now facing an unprecedented global crisis. We've experienced great changes and a paradigm shift in various aspects, including the economy, our society, the people's behavior, mindset. Now each country is seeking the new normal, and our future depends on whether we implement drastic reforms in the next few years. Today, I'd like to talk about 2 points: how we have contained the pandemic and restarted economic activities, how we are pursuing digitalization in Japan towards creating the new normal. First, let me share our response to COVID-19. The current death toll due to COVID-19 in Japan, 8 people per million, is much lower than in other advanced countries. The main reason is that the central and local government, as well as experts, actively sent simple and clear message to our citizens to avoid the 3 C's, namely closed spaces, crowded places, and close contact settings. We adopted a liberal approach to contain the infection by asking people to voluntarily stay at home, along with raising public hygiene awareness. In addition, our universal healthcare system enables people to access high quality medical care services, which has also been helpful. These measures have contributed to our solidarity in fighting COVID-19 and avoiding social divide. So far, we have succeeded in containing a major wave of the infection, and we are now restarting economic activities in a phased manner, bearing in mind that the small waves may come. We will continue to swiftly detect them by expanding the capacity of PCR tests and antigen tests and carry out cluster containment. Thirdly, in order to prevent another major wave, it is crucial to adapt our social and economic activities to the new normal by avoiding the 3 C's when we restart economic activities. In the last few days, as Mr. Ito or Professor Ito mentioned, the number of new infections has increased, especially in restaurants in Tokyo. It is because some people wanted to go back to the old normal of pre-COVID-19 period. Japanese people tend to behave in the same manner as others. This worked well to make people united in containing major waves of the infection in March and April. But now it is more efficient and effective to focus on the sector which spread of the infection, instead of asking all people to stay at home. We'll evolve the Japan's model by gathering the wisdom of our expertise, such as Professor Yamanaka, one of the Nobel Prize winners, and making full use of our cutting-edge supercomputer and artificial intelligence. The COVID-19 has severely affected the Japanese economy. However, Japan has a scheme to subsidize job retention, and this time we raise the maximum amount to the highest level in the world, as well as earmarked as much as $15 billion. In addition, we introduced a new scheme to grant $19,000 to SMEs whose sales has declined after the spread of the infection. We also decided to deliver 900 grant to all residents, and 90% of their households have received it. We have already directly disbursed $143 billion as these grants and subsidies to farms and households, and $404 billion as loans. Thanks to those measures, the unemployment rate in Japan remains at 2.9%, which is much lower than the rate in the United States. Second, I'd like to discuss our challenges. This crisis has revealed the weakest points of each country. In Japan, this is digitalization, especially in the processing of the support programs that I mentioned. The delay in digitalization of the government is revealed. As the infection limited the government movement of people, remote services have prevailed. The number of morning commuters in Tokyo decreased by 40%. And the problem of notoriously jam-packed trains has already disappeared. People's mindsets and behaviors have changed. Taking these changes as a great opportunity for reform, I decided to intensively promote digitalization over the next year as a Digital New Deal initiatives. We change administrative functions, work style, and family lives, as well as corporate inequality problem. I'd like to explain it in detail. First, we are promoting online administrative procedures and the one-stop and once-only services. In addition, we'll review our business practices based on using papers, seals, and face-to-face communication, and instead make electronic signatures prevail. Next, we'll never backslide from this new trend of work-life balance and various work style, such as working from home or having side jobs created by teleworking. In America, where 85% of firms have already introduced teleworking, reward system based on achievements have been established. On the other hand, only 19% of Japanese firms have introduced teleworking. We will implement regulatory reforms such as enhancing employment rules, including introduction of an evaluation system based on achievements, not on working hours. The prevalence of teleworking would make it easier to balance between working and childcare. In families with small children, Japanese husbands spend only 1 hour and 23 minutes per day on houseworking and childcare, which is less than half of time spending in the United States. Japanese families with a husband spending longer amounts of time doing housework and childcare trying to have more than 2 children. The more balanced burden of housework and child care between husband and wife, the higher the fertility rate will be. Next, I'd like to between major cities and local areas would result in a large gap in teleworking and remote education, which could be another source of inequality in the new normal. In particular, getting education is a basic right for all children. Remote education, especially in public schools, is indispensable for children to study, even in the emergency of school closures. We are aiming to equip every elementary and junior high school student with his or her own computer by March 2021. Online education is suitable for individually customizing learning. We'll change our education towards enhancing our children's ability of setting an agenda, solving problems, and promoting their creativity from just teaching standard solutions. We need to enhance their ability and stimulate innovation by utilizing the merits of digitalization. And at the same time, there is an inclusive education system for all children with various backgrounds. To address the digital divide between regions, we'll start offering 5G service in all 47 prefectures by March 2021, and enhance constructing 5G stations and introducing private 5G networks. A crisis provides a window of opportunity. In history, the pandemic brought the big changes for the economy and society. The Black Death in the 14th century resulted in the Renaissance and Protestant Reformation. The Spanish Flu of 1918 made more people recognize the importance of the international cooperation in the public health. Let me conclude by emphasizing that Japan will consider this crisis as a chance to accelerate the reform, which we have not yet realized, and that will continue to contribute to global public health and economic development. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Nishimura. That was a great presentation. I just have a very quick question, Minister Nishimura. We know that the number of testing, PCR testing, is not that large in Tokyo. New York State is doing PCR testing about 70 to 80,000 every day. And Tokyo is testing only 3,000 to 4,000 a day. So it's like a 20 times difference. And we means that I think many in New York State and London think that massive testing is a key to reopen the economy without worrying about the second wave. So why is Tokyo so reluctant, or Japan so reluctant to increase the number of testing, which appears to be? Or if there's a bottleneck, where is the bottleneck? And if you can enlighten us the current thinking of the PCR testing, that'd be great. Please.
Thank you, Professor Ito-san. We are now increasing the number of tests. However, let me emphasize that it is more important to test strategically and effectively. We focus on people with symptoms and those who are in close contact with infected. High-risk workers in the entertainment sector, such as bars and clubs, and in hospitals and elderly care facilities. We will also expand the capacity of tests at airports in preparation for restarting flow of business people over our borders. In addition, we improve the efficiency of the testing process, such as adopting new machines and introducing new methods using a saliva sample. Just expanding tests never brings perfect safety to the people. Even if the test result shows negative, they may be infected after testing, and the result may be false negative. It is necessary to adapt our social and economic activities to the new normal by avoiding the 3 C's and keeping washing hands and wearing masks and disinfecting and air ventilation. So that's what I want to say. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So let me turn to Professor Hubbard. Glenn is my longtime friend. Would you please share your thoughts with us, Glenn?
Yes, thank you, Taka, and thanks to CJEB for putting this webinar series together. And it's certainly an honor to share the Zoom stage with Minister Nishimura. And I couldn't agree more with him, both on prospects on international learning and for international cooperation in dealing with the pandemic. Because the time is short for remarks, I really just wanted to focus on 3 areas. One, to David's polling question about the shape of the recovery in the United States. Second, a little bit on public policies toward economic recovery, particularly fiscal and monetary policy. And then some quick observations about the long-term implications, perhaps, of the novel coronavirus. David asked everybody to do a poll, both for Japan and for the United States. My own view for the US hasn't really changed much since the crisis began, which is we're likely to see a Nike swoosh. And I say that because there's an obvious downturn, which is probably why many people selected it, both in Japan and the United States, but a very gradual upturn. I also prefer it to some of the other letters of the alphabet that David reviewed with everybody, because it's endogenous to policy. That we know that the way we intervene in health policy, the way we intervene in economic policy can change the slope. Just as in a swoosh or a check mark, a slope can be more gradual or a slope can be steep. What's critically important, and the minister mentioned this and I agree completely, is that healthcare policy must first be in the driver's seat. There really is not a path to recovery that is not a path to reining in the virus. I say this in part because there's a lot of public attention and popular and populist attention to regulation, to shutdowns, to closures. Really a story about the reopening of the economy from the economic perspective is less a story about regulation as it is people's behavior. In New York, when is somebody willing to take the subway again, or go to a sports event again, or even a church or other religious service again? That's going to be more important to a reopening than the rules that come from New York City or New York State. The pandemic was hard, I think, for economic policymakers because it combines both aggregate supply shocks and aggregate demand shocks. The aggregate supply shock is obvious. In order to deal with the virus, people's behavior and public policy shut down large sectors of the economy. Because those sectors of the economy tended to be more in the services production rather than goods production, that output is unlikely to be made up. While I can buy a car later, I can't replace haircuts that I lost or meals eaten out that I lost. So that is a long-term hole for the economy. The task for policy was to make that closure as economically beneficial as it could be, but also to stop what I and some other economists have called an aggregate demand doom loop. That is, from mass unemployment, as happened at the onset of the crisis in the United States, or a cascade of business failures from adding a demand contraction to what could have been a supply shock. A lot of this came about because of a lack of resilience of balance sheets in much of the non-financial business sector in the United States. Public policy, a couple of observations, one on fiscal policy and one on monetary policy. Fiscal policy in the US has gone in 2 steps. One is to make sure that the blow of the original shutdown was cushioned. So I think there of expansions in unemployment insurance protection for people who lost their jobs, or the so-called Paycheck Protection Program to protect small and mid-sized firms so that their relationships are not lost. Increasingly, though, as the US Congress and administration have complemented or considered the need for additional aid, there's a recognition that additional aid needs to focus on US states who also face the prospect of declining public services, even education, in response to the crisis. A reform of the unemployment insurance program to make sure that it's attractive to choose work over non-work while still cushioning the blow of the pandemic. Also rewarding low-wage work. Former Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner and I made a suggestion of a radical expansion in public subsidies for low-wage work to keep low-wage workers attached to the labor force during the crisis. And then finally, continued attention on small and mid-sized firms who really face the prospect of very large-scale sets of bankruptcies that can be very painful for the economy. Fiscal policy is focused there. The Federal Reserve has really been very active in the US, as has the Bank of Japan. The Fed focused on traditional monetary policy, I would call it Fed 1.0, of bringing down interest rates, conducting open market operations. But it quickly moved to Fed 2.0 of intervening in markets other than the Treasury market to keep markets functioning better. So I'm thinking of agency, mortgage-backed securities, and even investment-grade corporate credit. Federal Reserve 3.0 began to take the Fed into uncharted, and some might say dangerous, waters of credit risk. That is, intervening in markets for municipal debt, or in markets for corporate debt where credit risk was present, that is no longer investment grade securities. And then finally, Federal Reserve 4.0, very new and very risky, a so-called Main Street lending facility to deal with the problems of small and mid-sized firms' access to credit. That facility, in my own view, and we can come back to this if anyone likes, is very poorly designed and is almost surely going to fail, again raising the question about small and mid-sized businesses in the crisis. Both the fiscal and the monetary policy elements that I discussed raise questions of exit. The fiscal policies, because they're so expensive and government debt is elevated in the United States as it is in Japan, raise questions of exit. How will public policy restore pre-crisis trajectories of the debt to GDP? For the Federal Reserve, the question remains of will it exit from certain programs? What will the equilibrium size of its balance sheet be? Perhaps most interesting or longer term implications of the crisis, the third and final topic I wanted to mention. Here, first of all, in the US, there needs to be more of an emphasis on what I would call an engineer's mindset more than an economist, of which sectors need to be opened first. So I think of schools, I think of certain sectors that have bottlenecks. We have seen very little of that kind of thinking in US policy, and we need to see more. The second longer term implication is the importance of resilience in balance sheets. Many businesses, many households, many state and local governments simply did not have the financial wherewithal to manage the crisis. The federal government does, of course, up to a degree, but the question is how can one encourage that kind of resilience more broadly? We're also in early days, I think, of seeing big structural shifts in the economy. For example, in the service sector, in markets for urban commercial real estate, how will the structure of rents evolve in the future? What kind of office and service demands will we be likely to see in an economy where many business leaders feel more people could work remotely for an extended period of time? How do rental and living arrangements evolve over time as between large metropolitan areas like New York, where I speak to you from, versus suburban areas or even rural areas in the country? We also are seeing, as I said, a very big increase in business leaders' interest in remote work. not as a 0-1 of just somebody entirely work at home or work in a professional office, but a mix. We know that creativity is better in an office. In some sense, people can be even more productive on more routine tasks at home. How do employers decide how to mix that up in a way that encourages good labor market trajectories for workers, maintains productivity? That is a huge question. In my own industry, in Taka's, in education, there will likely be enormous disruptions. I have been teaching by Zoom at Columbia University. I did so this past Friday. I will do so in the fall. That is going to be a shift, I think, in how we deliver education in the foreseeable future, long after the pandemic is gone. Not that universities become online, but the way we bundle educational products may be different. Let me wrap up, though, by emphasizing something the minister did that ties together all of these elements of the shape of the recovery, about how to think about policy and the long term. And that goes back to healthcare policy itself. Testing and tracing remain important. And the most critical, most cost-effective, if I can say so, investments policymakers can make really are in that activity and in public health infrastructure. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Glenn. I just have one quick question that you emphasize the people's behavior, people's initiative, rather than strong regulations and so on. But many people think that what's happening in the southern states, that Florida, Texas, and California, where numbers are rising in contrast to New York, that people are behaving irresponsibly, not wearing masks and gathering on the beach and drinking in the bars and so on. What do you think? How do you explain this difference between New York and southern states?
It's very interesting and very complicated, Taka. I think it may have to do with cultural and political differences. You would not think that a scientific question like, should I wear a mask, is a subject of political debate. In the US, it very much is. So part of this is about education efforts, but there have been academic studies by colleagues like Austin Goolsbee and others that have documented not much difference in the literal timing of regulatory activities. That really, most of it is individual behavior. But I do take your point that we need to do better.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's have the panel discussion. Nishimura, please come back on. Thank you.
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, so I'd like to follow up the last question I asked to Glenn, that in Japan, actually, there is a call for stronger action by the government. The difference between New York and Tokyo is that New York, that the governor said, you know, all the businesses have to close. And in Tokyo, as you emphasized, it was more request by the government and people comply. But now the cases are increasing again in Tokyo. People are asking the government, why don't you, shut down the nightclubs and other places which have clusters? How would you, respond to those calls? Let's revise the law, give more power to you, and solve the problem.
So please let me speak in Japanese. So, まず第2波のように見える今の増加数について少しお話しします。
Please allow me to speak in Japanese and use the interpreter. First of all, let me talk about the recent increase, which may look as if it is the second wave.
これ伊藤先生がおっしゃったように、今は無症状の人も含めて幅広く PCR 検査をリスクの高いところでやっていってますので、その結果、数は増えてますが、2次感染、3次感染をそこで防げるという効果が出てます。
As Professor Ito mentioned, now we are extending the PCR testing in high-risk areas, including for people without symptoms. And that is why the persons numbers are. But at the same time, this is effective.
まさにテスト テスティング、トレーシングで隔離していくという施策をリスクの高いところで今やっていっています。
As it was mentioned precisely, that is what we are doing, that we are doing the testing and the tracing in the high risk sectors.
それが東京の新宿をはじめとする夜の繁華街のいわゆるクラブやバーなどのところで高いリスクが今認められています。そこでかなりの範囲でテスティングをやっています。
For example, in the Shinjuku region and others in Tokyo, the so-called nighttime entertainment areas, including clubs and bars, for example, risks are high in such areas, and therefore tests are conducted extensively.
ここでどういう対策を取るかでバランスを取りながらやっています。一つは、いわゆる北風と太陽のアプローチで言えば、太陽のアプローチで、これは HIV の経験を持つ専門家の皆さんのアドバイスで、事業者の皆さんと協力しながら、テストを受けてもらっています。そうしないと彼らが地下に潜ってしまったり、他の地域に動いたりするからです。
So what measures should be taken? And we are trying to strike a good balance, whether it is the cold north breeze or the sunshine policy. It is the sunshine that we are trying to take. We are learning from the advisors who have past experiences in HIV epidemic, and we are asking the cooperation of the businesses so that the people will or shy away or relocate to other places.
で、他方で、北風のアプローチも必要だと思ってまして、やはり協力してくれない事業者がいますから、より強力な強制力を持った、措置が必要ではないかということを考えています。
Having said that, at the same time, we do acknowledge that some kind of a cold north wind policy is also necessary. So if there are non-cooperative businesses, then we might have to think about some more coercive, compelling authorities.
強制力を持つ形でテスティングをしたり、あるいは営業停止をしたりする措置が、今の我々の持っている法律では非常に難しい、できないものですから、そういった措置も検討しなきゃいけないと思っています。
Under the current legislation, it is extremely difficult or almost impossible for us to coerce people to take the tests or to forcibly shut down or discontinue the businesses. So we shall have to think about such possible measures.
ただ、全体としては非常にリベラルなアプローチで、強制力を持たないロックダウンといっても強制力を持たない形でステイホームをしてもらってますし、それから今、アプリを入れて、接触、人と人との接触を確認していくわけですけども、これも位置情報も電話番号も取らずに、非常にリベラルな形で進めています。
On the whole, we do have a rather liberal system or framework, so to say. Although we might use the terminology like lockdown, that is not offensive or any type of order, and we are asking people to voluntarily stay at home. And we do have what we contact confirmation application. However, again, that is rather liberal, where we do not acquire the geographical location information or telephone numbers of other individuals.
徹底的に監視をして、行動を監視をして、抑止をしていくシステムでもなく、また強制力を持って、外出を禁じるシステムでもなく、日本はここまで成功してきましたので、このリベラルなアプローチをより進化をさせていきたい。そのために、世界一になったスーパーコンピューターの富岳や、AI を使って、さらに進化させていきたいと考えています。それが基本的な考え方です。
So far, we have not taken a kind of a thorough surveillance system where we try to survey the behaviors and activities and try to suppress other people, nor have we taken a coercive approach to strictly prohibit going out of the home, for example. But so far, we have succeeded, and therefore we would like to further evolve this Japanese system. We have the Fugaku supercomputer, which has won the #1 ranking in the world. We shall be using artificial intelligences. This is our basic approach.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I have a question from David Weinstein and also from the audience, similar question. David worries about this resurgence in the numbers in the southern states may lead to another shutdown, and that may produce a W. And that's a scenario some people talk about. What do you think of that? And from audience, another scenario for W, which is this increase in bankruptcies and in the businesses, and that will go to the financial sector, and that the mortgages and bankruptcies and defaults, that may cause the financial crisis, and that will certainly make a W. So Glenn, so what do you think these probabilities or scenarios of this W in the US?
Those are great questions, and David shows why we don't walk away from dismal science, as the name of our profession. Look, on the resurgence, I don't think it's a W, and here's why. A better policy is not a 0-1 shutdown. We have learned that there are some sectors and activities in which contact is more dangerous. Bringing workers back to work, we may have to move to a system where older workers are treated differently from younger, healthier, and less risky workers. So I think there's much that we could do in a reopening. Earlier, when I referred to an engineer's mindset as opposed to an economic mindset, I think we could avoid a W. That, of course, requires the public to behave in a responsible way. I'm not a politician. I don't know how to persuade that. On the issue of bankruptcies, that's a real concern. The small and mid-sized businesses need equity. They don't really need more debt. The Fed's facility is a debt facility. The best thing the Fed could do is to mimic equity by making very long-term bullet loans at a very small interest rate, with every encouragement for banks to participate, which is a quasi-equity kind of arrangement. The Federal Reserve has already been given capital to stand that up, so that would be my suggestion.
Thank you. So move on to next question back to Minister Nishimura on this digitalization you emphasized, and it is written in the basic policy this year. And the question is two parts. First one is that I think I heard digitalization or e-government before, like 20 years ago. And government of Japan has been emphasizing that for a long time. So what is different this time? What's the difference are you going to make? And can you give us some concrete examples and resolve to push? And second part is how do you do it? This is a question from our audience, that do you provide incentives, for example, to provide the infrastructure for 5G from to every village in Japan? So what is the difference this time, and how do you make the difference this time, please?
ありがとうございます。今回このコロナでもう強烈な体験を国民もそして政府もしたわけです。
Thank you for the question. Indeed, both the Japanese people as well as the government, we have had such a sharp and striking experience due to this coronavirus.
国民の皆さんはテレワークで家にいても時々は会社に行かなきゃいけない。なぜならハンコをしに行かなきゃいけない。日本流のこのハンコという文化が残っていた。あるいは請求書の封筒を開けに行かなきゃいけない。なんでこれがネットワークの中でできないのか。このことをもうほとんどの人が疑問に思ったわけです。
As for the Japanese people, although they might do telework at home, sometimes they have to travel to their offices and companies. That is because of the remaining Japanese business cultural practice of stamping the seal onto documents, or they have to travel to the offices in order to open the physical envelopes containing the invoices. And many of the Japanese people are all questioning, why can't all these be done online?
先ほどの1人$900の給付にしてもオンラインでなんで時間がかかってできないんだ。そして先ほどの休業保障をする、国の支援もなんでオンラインでやろうとしたらそれが途中で不具合が出てしまったのか。強烈な批判も政府は受けたわけです。
I mentioned about the $900 per individual, which was the direct cash benefit. And there were lots of dissatisfactions asking why this online procedure takes so much time, or for the compensation and support for the businesses who had to temporarily close. Again, whilst they tried to do the procedures online, again, in the middle of the procedures, there were defects and problems. And as a result, the government was strongly criticized.
なぜコロナバイラスにかかるリスクを負ってまでしてお腹が痛いのに病院に行かなきゃいけないのか、なんでオンラインで診療ができないのか、これ多くの国民が思ったわけです。
Many of the Japanese people thought, why do we have to just make a visit to the hospital with a stomachache, a tummy ache, when you are so frightened about the possible risk of being infected by the coronavirus? Why can't we meet the doctors and seek the treatment online?
政府は立ってられなくなったわけです。
And therefore, the government could not stand these criticisms.
そこでオンライン診療の規制緩和をしました。
As a result, we did deregulate.
ハンコがなくとも有効だということを示しました。
As a result, the government did deregulate the rules about online medical treatment by the doctors, and we have made it clear that the documents will be enforceable even without the physical seals stamped.
ネット上の電子署名でこれが有効であるということをもう間もなく示します。
And very soon, we shall be making it very clear that the documents will be effective and enforceable with electronic signatures.
今回の危機が規制緩和も一気に進めてくれました。
Because of this crisis, we are now seeing a very accelerated deregulation all at once.
もうこの危機意識が今回大きな変革のドライビングフォースとなっています。
This crisis has been the major driving force of this transformation.
あとはデジタルガバメントですので、この1年間でデジタル化を成し遂げますから、ぜひ1年後、このウェビナーまた招待していただいて、その時どんだけ変わったかお話したいと思います。
And again, we are going to realize a digital government, and we are going to make this real within 1 year. Please do invite me back again to this webinar after 1 year, and let me tell you how drastically we have changed.
Okay, thank you very much. That's a promise that we will do. Okay, we're running out of time very quickly, but Glenn, last question. So, as you mentioned that you did Zoom teaching, and I did Zoom teaching in the spring semester, and I found many possibilities. It was surprised that the discussions are so easy with students in the remote teaching. But so you must have also experienced some, discovery and finding some potentials. So what do you think that universities will be in the post-COVID world? Would that be better teaching, better experience for students and also faculty members? And can we make universities better?
Well, to be honest, it is going to be harder for faculty members. It was hard for me, but I find the Zoom technology very democratizing for students. It's easier for everybody to be on a level playing field. It was also easy for me to get guest speakers for short bits from all over the world. It would have been hard to ask somebody to make the journey, but for 20 minutes from someone's desk, they can come in and talk with me about a topic. It's really enriching for students. So I think this will be part of our toolkit. I also think another democratizing feature is it gives universities a chance to give content to a much wider audience than the people who literally attend a great university. So I think it's a plus.
Thank you very much. So unfortunately, we are running out of time. And so I'd like to wrap it up for today. And thank you very much, Minister Nishimura. Thank you very much, Glenn. And we will do it again a year from today to check on the progress. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. And, let me advertise the next webinar, which will be on August 5th. And we will have Governor of Bank of Japan, Haruhiko Kuroda, and the former chair of FRB, Janet Yellen. And please come back and join our meeting. Thank you very much. And we also thank all sponsors of CJEB.